The studio lights burned white-hot against her skin, but Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett didn't blink. Not once. Not when the cameras swung toward her. Not when Ivanka Trump's manicured fingers gripped the edge of the polished desk hard enough to leave impressions in the wood. "Since we're discussing legacy," Jasmine said, her voice cutting through the artificial stillness like a blade through silk, "perhaps we should speak directly about what has been omitted from the narrative." 60 million Americans watched from their living rooms. The moderator's mouth opened, then closed. Somewhere behind the cameras, a producer whispered frantically into a headset, and Ivanka Trump, poised, polished, perpetually composed, felt the blood drain from her face. What came next would shatter a carefully constructed image, and nothing would ever be the same. Before we go deeper into this story, take a second and hit that subscribe button, give this video a like, and let us know where you're watching from. I'm curious to know how far these stories travel. The story of that night didn't begin under studio lights. It began years earlier in two very different Americas. Jasmine Felicia Crockett was born on March the 29th, 1981, in St. Louis, Missouri, a city that knew both the grandeur of the Gateway Arch and the quiet devastation of neighborhoods left behind by industry and indifference. Her father, Reverend Joseph Crockett, preached every Sunday at a small church where the pews creaked with age, and the congregation sang hymns that had traveled through generations of black families who understood what it meant to hope against hope. Her mother, Gwen, worked for the Postal Service. Rain, snow, heat, gloom of night. She sorted letters and packages while her daughter sat at the kitchen table doing homework, the radio playing Motown in the background. Jasmine learned early that dignity wasn't given. It was earned. It was fought for. It was sometimes wrestled from the hands of those who believed they deserved it more. She attended Mary Institute and St. Louis Country Day School, then Rosati Kane Academy, a private Catholic girls' school where she was often one of the few black faces in photographs. The experience taught her to navigate spaces that weren't designed for her, to speak in rooms where silence was expected of people who looked like her. At Rhodes College in Memphis, Tennessee, a professor watched her perform in Little Shop of Horrors and saw something beyond stage presence. "You should try mock trial," he said. "You have a voice that makes people listen." But it was the hate crimes on campus that truly forged her path. When racist hate mail arrived and her black friends' cars were keyed, the administration floundered. They brought in lawyers from the Cochran firm to help. One of those lawyers, a black woman who walked into that room with authority and compassion, became Jasmine's instant shero. That was the moment she knew the law could be a weapon for justice. She earned her Juris Doctor from the University of Houston Law Center in 2006 and became a public defender in Bowie County, Texas, defending the indigent, the forgotten, the presumed guilty before proven innocent. Later, she started her own law firm, taking pro bono cases for Black Lives Matter activists while handling personal injury work to keep the lights on. Politics found her in 2020 during a time of turmoil. She won her seat in the Texas House of Representatives, became the youngest black lawmaker in the chamber, and filed more bills than any other freshman. 2 years later, she was elected to Congress, representing Texas's 30th congressional district, the seat once held by the legendary Eddie Bernice Johnson. By 2025, Jasmine Crockett had become one of the most recognizable voices of Democratic opposition. She didn't mince words, she didn't smile when she disagreed, and she absolutely did not back down. Ivana Marie Ivanka Trump was born on October 30th, 1981, just 7 months after Jasmine, into a world that couldn't have been more different. Manhattan's Upper East Side was her playground. Her father, Donald John Trump, born June 14th, 1946, in Queens, New York, was already a real estate mogul with his name emblazoned on buildings across the city. Her mother, Ivana, a Czech-born model, dressed her daughter in designer clothes before she could walk. The family lived in a triplex penthouse in Trump Tower, 68 floors above Fifth Avenue. While Jasmine Crockett learned to navigate systemic barriers, Ivanka learned to navigate privilege. The private schools, the magazine covers, the weight of a famous name that opened every door but also cast a long shadow. Her parents' divorce in 1990, when she was 9, was a tabloid spectacle. Her mother's face, streaked with tears, appeared on newspaper covers. Her father's affairs were dissected in public. Ivanka learned early to build walls, not the kind her father would later promise for the border, but the invisible kind that kept the hurt from showing. She attended Chapin School, then Choate Rosemary Hall in Connecticut, where she found boarding school suffocating. Like a prison, she would later say. Modeling offered escape. 17 magazine, runway shows for Versace and Thierry Mugler. But she ultimately chose business over beauty, graduating cum laude from the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania in 2004 with a degree in economics. She joined the Trump Organization, rose to Executive Vice President of Development and Acquisitions, and appeared alongside her father on The Apprentice. She launched her own fashion line, wrote best-selling books, and cultivated an image of the modern professional woman, polished, ambitious, independent, yet deeply connected to her family's empire. When Donald Trump won the presidency in 2016, Ivanka followed him to Washington, becoming a senior advisor despite anti-nepotism concerns. Her husband, Jared Kushner, a real estate developer she'd married in 2009 after converting to Judaism, served alongside her. Together, they navigated the chaos of an administration that critics called unprecedented and supporters called revolutionary. By 2025, with her father returned to the Oval Office for his second term, Ivanka had largely retreated from public political life. She focused on her children, Arabella, Joseph, and Theodore, and her business interests. But she still carried the family name. She still defended it fiercely. And when she agreed to appear on a televised political panel, she believed she could control the narrative. She was wrong. The invitation arrived in January 2025. 3 weeks after the inauguration. The American Future Forum, a new program on a major network, designed to bring together voices from across the political spectrum for substantive dialogue. The producers wanted Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett and Ivanka Trump on the same panel. At first, both women hesitated. Jasmine's chief of staff, Marcus, sat across from her in her Capitol Hill office, the invitation printed on heavy cardstock between them. "This could be a trap," he said. "They want fireworks, not conversation." "Or," Jasmine countered, "it's an opportunity to speak directly to people who've only seen me in clips taken out of context." She thought of her father's sermons, how he always said the truth needed a platform, even when the platform was built by those who didn't want to hear it. She signed the acceptance. In Miami, where Ivanka now spent most of her time, the calculus was different. Her publicist, a woman named Christine, who had navigated celebrity crises for 2 decades, saw value in the appearance. "It's been months since you've done anything substantial publicly," Christine said. "People forget. They move on. If you want the Ivanka Trump brand to matter in 5 years, you need to remind them who you are." Ivanka stared out at Biscayne Bay, watching a yacht drift lazily across the blue water. The brand. Always the brand. Sometimes she wondered what would remain of her if you stripped away the name, the image, the carefully curated public persona. "Fine," she said. "But I control the narrative. I speak about what I choose to speak about." Christine nodded. They both knew that control was an illusion in live television. The tension between these two women didn't begin with this panel. It had been building for years in small moments scattered across news cycles. There was the 2024 Democratic National Convention, where Jasmine Crockett took the stage in Chicago and delivered a speech that electrified the arena. "The other side," she declared, her voice rising, "offers us a vindictive, vile villain who thinks the rules don't apply to him." The crowd erupted. Clips circulated for days. Ivanka watched from her living room, her children asleep upstairs, and felt something tighten in her chest. She knew the words were aimed at her, father, but they landed on her too, on the name she shared, the legacy she'd spent her life both building and being burdened by. And there were the quieter tensions, the ways their lives had run parallel without intersecting. Both were professional women with law degrees. Both had navigated male-dominated spaces. Both understood the unique pressure of being scrutinized for every word, every outfit, every expression. But where Jasmine had fought her way through systems designed to exclude her, Ivanka had floated through systems designed to embrace her. Where Jasmine defended the indigent and marched for justice, Ivanka hosted charity galas and launched entrepreneurship initiatives that critics called performative. They represented two visions of America, two understandings of what it meant to succeed, to serve, to speak. And on the night of the panel, those visions would collide. The political landscape of early 2025 was charged with uncertainty. Donald Trump's second term had begun with executive orders that sparked protests in major cities. Immigration enforcement had intensified. Congressional Democrats, despite being in the minority, fought every battle with a ferocity born of desperation. Jasmine Crockett had become a frequent presence on cable news, her sharp commentary making her both a hero to progressives and a target for conservative media. She had announced her intention to run for the Senate in 2026, shaking up the Democratic primary in Texas. The Trumps, meanwhile, presented a united front, at least publicly. But whispers circulated about tensions within the family, about Ivanka's desire for distance, about decisions made during the first administration that still cast shadows. The American Future Forum was supposed to rise above the noise. It was supposed to model a better kind of political discourse. Instead, it became something else entirely. The studio was designed to feel warm. Soft lighting, earth-toned set pieces, comfortable, chairs arranged in a semicircle. But as the guests took their seats that evening, the warmth felt artificial, like a stage set for a play that had already gone off script. Jasmine arrived first, accompanied by Marcus. She wore a tailored navy suit with gold earrings that caught the light, deliberate choices that projected authority without ostentation. She shook hands with the moderators, a veteran journalist named David Reese and a former network anchor named Patricia Huang, and made small talk with the other panelists, a conservative economist, a progressive activist, and a former Republican strategist who now worked as a political consultant. When Ivanka entered, the energy shifted. She was immaculate. Ivory blouse, cream-colored pants, her blonde hair falling in perfect waves. She greeted the moderators warmly, exchanged polite nods with the other panelists, and took her seat directly across from Jasmine. Their eyes met for a moment. Neither smiled. The first hour of the program proceeded predictably. They discussed economic policy, with Jasmine advocating for expanded social programs and Ivanka defending tax cuts and deregulation. They debated immigration, the conversation growing heated but remaining within bounds. The audience, a studio full of carefully selected viewers, applauded at appropriate moments. But something was building beneath the surface. Jasmine could feel it in the way Ivanka's answers grew more pointed, more personal. The businesswoman began referencing her family's values, her family's commitment to this country, framing her positions not as political arguments, but as moral inheritances. If you've ever sat in a room where the temperature seems to rise without anyone touching the thermostat, you understand what the audience felt that night. Something was coming. They just didn't know what. When the moderators introduced the topic of political dynasties and generational leadership, the fault lines became visible. Congresswoman Crockett, David Reese began, you've spoken about breaking barriers. How do you view the role of legacy in American politics? Jasmine leaned forward slightly. I believe every generation has to earn its place. Being born into privilege doesn't disqualify anyone from public service, but it also doesn't qualify them. What matters is what you do with your opportunity, whether you use it to lift others up or to consolidate your own power. It was a measured answer, carefully calibrated, but Ivanka heard the subtext. If I may, Ivanka interjected, her voice smooth but edged. I'd like to respond to what seems like an implied criticism. Patricia Huang nodded. Please. I was raised in a family where respect, loyalty, and strength mattered, Ivanka said, turning slightly to face Jasmine directly. Some people, especially in politics, don't carry those same values at home, and it shows in how they conduct themselves publicly, the audience murmured. Jasmine's expression didn't change, but her eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. My family supports each other, Ivanka continued, and unlike some people here, we don't drag children into our political agendas. The implication hung in the air like smoke. Jasmine felt her pulse quicken. She had spent years developing the discipline to remain calm under attack. Years in courtrooms, in legislative chambers, on cable news segments where hosts tried to bait her into anger. She knew the trap being set, but she also knew something Ivanka didn't. The moderator, sensing the escalating tension, attempted to redirect. Let's move on to... Actually, Jasmine said, her voice calm but carrying an unmistakable weight. I'd like to respond. The studio fell silent. Cameras adjusted their angles. Jasmine folded her hands in her lap, a posture she'd learned from watching seasoned attorneys, open but controlled. She looked at Ivanka the way a prosecutor looks at a witness about to be cross-examined. Ms. Trump, she began, deliberately using the formal address, you mentioned family values. You mentioned loyalty. You mentioned not dragging children into political agendas. Ivanka's chin lifted slightly. She was ready for a fight. She had been ready for years. Since we're discussing legacy, Jasmine continued, perhaps we should speak directly about what has been omitted from the narrative. The words landed like stones dropped into still water. David Reese opened his mouth to intervene, but stopped when he saw the intensity in Jasmine's eyes. You brought up your family, Jasmine said. Not me. So let's talk about it. Let's talk about how political families, yours included, use children as symbols of innocence when it benefits the image, and hide them away when accountability comes knocking. Ivanka's lips parted. Her composure, built over decades of public scrutiny, began to crack. You're angry at me, Ivanka. Not because I said something untrue. You're angry because someone finally said out loud what insiders have whispered for years. The children in your family didn't choose the spotlight. You all put them in it whenever it serves your purposes, then claim they're off limits when the questions get uncomfortable. For a moment, no one breathed. Then Ivanka exploded. How dare you? She shot upright in her chair, her voice trembling, not with fear, but with fury. You don't get to talk about my family. You don't get to say anything about how we protect our own. The outburst jolted the studio. Audience members exchanged shocked glances. Producers scrambled behind the cameras. For years, Ivanka continued, her voice cracking, people like you have attacked my father, attacked my brothers, attacked me, and we've taken it. We've smiled through it. We've played nice while being called every name in the book. She was standing now, her carefully curated poise shattered. But I will not sit here and let you drag anyone else into your political theater. Patricia Huang raised a hand. Ms. Trump, please. No, Ivanka shouted. This is exactly what they do. They find the one thing that matters most to you, and they weaponize it. Jasmine remained seated, her expression steady. She let the storm rage around her. She had been in enough courtrooms to know that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stay still while your opponent loses control. When Ivanka finally paused, breathing hard, her eyes glistening, Jasmine spoke again. Her voice was soft now, almost gentle, but somehow that made the words hit harder. Ivanka, I understand that you're upset. I understand that you feel protective. Those are human emotions, and I respect them. She paused, letting the silence stretch. But protection and accountability are not opposites. They can coexist. And the American people deserve to know the full truth about the families who seek to lead them, not just the polished version that appears on magazine covers and campaign stages. The room held its breath. You wish to be seen as devoted, as loving, as loyal, Jasmine continued. But you've taken care to bury the parts that don't fit the story. And that's not protection. That's deception. Ivanka stared at her, tears threatening to spill. The broadcast cut to commercial. If you were watching that night, perhaps you remember the moment. Perhaps you were one of the millions who shared the clip before it was even finished airing. Or perhaps you're learning about it now, years later, trying to understand how a single exchange could reveal so much about the nature of power, image, and truth. What would you have done in Ivanka's position? How would you have responded to an attack that felt deeply personal on the most public of stages? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. The aftermath was immediate and overwhelming. Within minutes, clips of Ivanka's outburst flooded social media. Hashtags proliferated. Hashtag Crockett Bombshell. Hashtag Ivanka Meltdown. Hashtag American Future Forum. News networks interrupted their regular programming to replay the exchange. Pundits analyzed every word, every gesture, every shift in expression. Jasmine returned to her hotel room that night to find her phone exploding with notifications. Messages from colleagues, journalists, supporters, critics. Marcus sat in the corner scrolling through reaction tweets, his expression a mixture of awe and concern. You know they're going to come for you, he said quietly. Jasmine nodded. She knew. The Trump family had resources, connections, media allies, who would spin this story in every direction. She would be called a bully, a provocateur, a race baiter. Every word she'd spoken would be dissected and distorted. But she had also seen something in that studio that she hadn't expected to see. She had seen Ivanka Trump's mask slip. Not the politician's mask. Ivanka had never been a politician in the traditional sense. But the mask of the perfect daughter, the perfect businesswoman, the perfect representative of a perfect family. For just a moment, the exhaustion and the burden had become visible. Jasmine sat on the edge of the bed and thought about what that meant. Over the following days, journalists began digging. The exchange had sparked questions that had been simmering for years. What really went on behind the scenes of the Trump family's political dynasty? What pressures were placed on the children, not just Barron but all of them, to maintain the image, to perform the role, to carry the weight of a name that was both empire and cage? A former Trump Organization employee speaking on condition of anonymity told a reporter, "There were always two versions of everything, the version for public consumption and the version we lived. The kids learned early that their job was to make the family look good, no matter what." Another source, a former schoolmate of Ivanka's from Choate, recalled, "She was always performing. Even in casual conversations, she spoke like someone was recording her. I thought it was arrogance at first. Later I realized it was survival." None of this was new information exactly, but Jasmine's confrontation had created a permission structure for these stories to be told and heard in a different way. Meanwhile, the Trump family closed ranks. Donald Trump posted on social media, calling Jasmine a disgrace and the worst kind of politician. He threatened lawsuits, demanded retractions, accused the network of bias. Ivanka released a carefully crafted statement through her publicist. "I am proud of my family and will always defend those I love. I regret that the tone of last night's discussion became heated, but I will never apologize for standing up for what matters most to me." But something had changed. The statement didn't land the way it was supposed to. Instead of sympathy, Ivanka found herself facing a new wave of scrutiny, not about her political positions, but about the personal cost of maintaining an impossible standard of perfection. Jasmine, for her part, chose her next moves carefully. She appeared on a morning news program 2 days after the panel, speaking with measured calm. "I didn't go on that show to attack anyone personally," she said. "I want to have an honest conversation about accountability. And when someone responds to a call for transparency by calling it an attack, that tells you something about how they view transparency." She paused, looking directly into the camera. "I don't know Ivanka Trump's heart. I don't know her private struggles. But I do know this. The American people have a right to ask questions about the families who shape our politics. That's not cruelty. That's democracy." The interviewer pressed her. "Some have said you crossed a line by bringing family into it." Jasmine's expression didn't waver. "She brought family into it. I simply responded. And I will continue to respond as long as powerful people try to use their families as shields while using their power as weapons." It was, observers noted, a masterful performance. Where Ivanka had lost control, Jasmine had maintained it. Where Ivanka had reacted, Jasmine had responded. But the story wasn't over. In the weeks that followed the broadcast, Jasmine Crockett entered a new phase of her public life. She had always been outspoken, but now she carried a different kind of authority, the authority of someone who had stood in the fire and refused to burn. She returned to Congress with renewed focus. Bills she introduced received more attention. Colleagues who had kept their distance began seeking her counsel. The incident that had briefly made her a target had also made her a symbol. But the transformation wasn't only public, it was internal. Jasmine found herself thinking, late at night in her D.C. apartment, about the nature of confrontation. She had grown up hearing her father preach about justice and righteousness, about standing firm in the face of opposition. Those sermons had shaped her, but so had her years as a public defender, where she had learned that victory wasn't always about winning arguments. Sometimes it was about creating space for truth to emerge. She thought about the Stoic philosophers she had read in law school, Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, Seneca. They had written about the importance of distinguishing between what you can control and what you cannot, about meeting adversity with equanimity, about understanding that your character is revealed not in moments of comfort, but in moments of crisis. On that panel, she had been tested, and she had discovered something about herself. She could remain centered even when the storm raged around her. She could hold her ground without being destroyed by the impact. This was not coldness. It was discipline. It was the recognition that emotional regulation was itself a form of power, perhaps the most important form. She began incorporating this understanding into her public work more deliberately. When critics attacked, she responded with facts rather than fury. When allies urged escalation, she counseled patience. When opportunities arose to strike cheap blows, she declined. "I'm not interested in winning news cycles," she told Marcus one evening. "I'm interested in winning arguments. And you don't win arguments by making people defensive. You win by making people think." Her Senate campaign, announced in December 2025, reflected this evolution. Her ads were substantive, focused on policy, largely avoiding personal attacks. Her town halls were genuine conversations, not performances. She listened as much as she spoke, and slowly, steadily, she began to reshape what it meant to be a progressive voice in American politics. Not softer, but smarter. Not less passionate, but more precise. 6 months after the panel, an unexpected invitation arrived. Ivanka Trump's publicist reached out through intermediaries. Ms. Trump wished to have a private conversation with Congresswoman Crockett. No cameras, no staff, no publicity, just the two of them. Jasmine considered declining. The last thing she needed was a closed-door meeting that could be spun in 100 different ways if it leaked. Marcus advised against it. Her campaign team advised against it. Everyone who knew anything about politics advised against it. But something made her pause. She remembered Ivanka's face in that studio. Not the polished mask, but the raw grief and anger beneath it. She remembered thinking that she had seen, for just a moment, a human being trapped inside an image. "I'll take the meeting," she said. They agreed to meet in New York, at a private club where both women had connections. A neutral space. Jasmine flew up on a Wednesday evening, telling only Marcus where she was going. The club was old money. Dark wood paneling, oil paintings of stern-faced founders, leather, chairs worn soft with decades of use. Jasmine was shown to a private room on the second floor, where a fireplace crackled against the February chill. Ivanka was already there when she arrived. She looked different than she had on the panel. Smaller somehow. The armor of her public persona was missing, or at least partially removed. She wore minimal makeup and a simple black dress. Her eyes were red-rimmed, as though she hadn't been sleeping well. "Thank you for coming," Ivanka said, gesturing to a chair across from her. Jasmine sat. For a long moment, neither woman spoke. Then Ivanka said, "I've been thinking about what you said that night, about protection and accountability not being opposites." Jasmine nodded slowly, waiting. "I grew up learning that protecting my family meant controlling the story. If we controlled the story, we controlled the outcome. It was the only kind of power that felt real." She paused, staring at her hands. "But you can't control every story. And the ones you try hardest to control are the ones that eventually control you." It was an admission Jasmine hadn't expected. She felt her assumptions shifting, recalibrating. "I came here tonight because I have a request," Ivanka continued, "and because I think you're the only person who might understand." "What's the request?" Ivanka lifted her eyes. "I want to tell the truth. Not all of it. There are things that would hurt people I love, things that have to stay private, but enough of it. Enough to stop pretending." She took a breath. "I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm not asking you to be my ally. I'm asking you to witness this, because I think if I say it out loud to someone who won't let me lie, it might actually become real." Jasmine studied her for a long moment. The firelight played across Ivanka's face, softening its edges, making her look younger, or perhaps just more tired. "I'm listening," Jasmine said. What followed was a conversation that lasted nearly 3 hours. Ivanka spoke about her childhood, the gilded cage of Trump Tower, the divorce that had been a public spectacle before she understood what spectacle meant. She spoke about boarding school, about feeling like a trophy to be displayed and then put away. She spoke about her mother's expectations, her father's moods, the constant pressure to be perfect because perfection was the family currency. She spoke about the first administration, the chaos she had tried to manage, the compromises she had made, the moments when she had disagreed but stayed silent because loyalty demanded it. She spoke about January 6th, about watching the Capitol stormed while her father did nothing, about the rupture in her understanding of who he was. And she spoke about now, about trying to build a life apart from the name, about wanting her children to have a different inheritance than the one she'd received. Jasmine listened without interruption. She had conducted thousands of interviews in her legal career, had learned when to press and when to simply hold space. This was a moment for holding space. When Ivanka finally fell silent, the fire had burned down to embers. "Why me?" Jasmine asked. "Of all the people you could have told this to, why choose the woman who attacked you on national television?" Ivanka's smile was sad. "Because you were the first person in years who looked at me and saw something other than the brand. When you talked about accountability, you were angry, genuinely angry. And I realized I couldn't remember the last time someone was genuinely angry with me. Everyone around me is either performing or protecting. You were neither." She paused. "And honestly, I think part of me wanted to be seen as a real person, even if that person was being criticized. At least it was honest." Jasmine felt something shift inside her. Not sympathy exactly, but recognition. The recognition that even people who seem to have everything could be trapped by their circumstances. That privilege didn't protect you from pain. It just gave you different pain, wrapped in better packaging. "I'm not going to tell you what to do," Jasmine said finally. "That's not my place. But I will tell you what I believe. The truth isn't just something you tell. It's something you do. It's how you live, day after day. If you want a different story, you have to write it differently." She stood, gathering her coat. "For what it's worth," she added, "I don't think it's too late. But I do think it's hard. Harder than anything you've done before." Ivanka nodded slowly. "I know." They stood facing each other, two women from opposite worlds, shaped by opposite forces, meeting in the strange middle ground where truth made unlikely connections possible. Jasmine extended her hand. Ivanka took it. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't alliance. It was something simpler and perhaps more valuable. Acknowledgement that the other person was real. The meeting remained private. Neither woman spoke of it publicly, though rumors would eventually circulate that something had happened, some shift in the dynamic between them. What changed was subtle but visible. Ivanka began making different choices. She stepped back from public appearances that served only the family brand. She started working quietly with organizations that didn't carry her name or seek her celebrity, immigration advocacy groups, surprisingly, and educational programs for underserved communities. When journalists asked about her political future, she said only, "I'm focused on being useful, not famous." Her father raged privately about her withdrawal. There were reports of heated phone calls, demands that she return to the fold. But Ivanka had found something that mattered more than her father's approval, her own integrity, emerging slowly from beneath decades of performance. Jasmine, meanwhile, continued her Senate campaign. She won the Democratic primary in a landslide and found herself in a competitive general election against a well-funded Republican opponent. The race became one of the most watched in the country, a test case for whether a black woman who refused to moderate her message could win statewide in Texas. The incident at the American Future Forum became, over time, a footnote, one dramatic moment in a larger story. But those who had watched it closely understood its significance. It had cracked something open. It had revealed that beneath the partisan warfare, beneath the personal attacks, there were human beings struggling with questions that had no easy answers. On election night, as the returns came in, Jasmine sat with her family in a Dallas hotel ballroom. Her father was there, wearing his Sunday suit despite it being Tuesday. Her mother held her hand. Marcus paced near the televisions, watching the numbers climb. When the race was called in her favor, the room erupted. But Jasmine's first thought, strangely, was of Ivanka, alone in her Miami home, watching the same results. perhaps wondering what this victory meant for the country she had once helped govern. They had never spoken again after that night in New York, but Jasmine believed in some way that their conversation had mattered. That truth, once spoken, had a way of spreading, of changing things you couldn't predict or control. There is a particular kind of courage required to speak difficult truths in public. But there is another kind of courage, perhaps harder, required to hear them. Jasmine Crockett entered that studio believing she understood the nature of the fight. She left understanding something more complex, that the people on the other side of her battles were not simply villains or obstacles, but human beings with their own wounds, their own constraints, their own desperate attempts to protect what they loved. This didn't make her softer on policy. It didn't make her any less committed to justice, but it gave her something valuable, the ability to see her opponents as fully human, and therefore to respond to them in ways that were more precise, more effective, more truly powerful. Ivanka Trump, for her part, discovered that the image she had spent her life constructing was also a prison. The walls she had built to protect herself had also trapped her, cut her off from the truth, from authentic relationships, from the possibility of change. Breaking free required not just honesty with others, but honesty with herself. Their stories continued, separately, but somehow connected by that one evening in a private club, by words spoken and heard in the firelight. And in the telling of this story, perhaps there is something for all of us. A reminder that beneath the political theater, beneath the cable news shouting, beneath the endless cycles of outrage and performance, there are real people making real choices. Choices about whether to protect our images or pursue our truths. Choices about whether to see our opponents as enemies or as fellow travelers through a difficult world. The bombshell that Jasmine Crockett dropped that night wasn't really about the Trump family. It was about all of us, about the stories we tell to protect ourselves and the courage it takes to tell different stories. So here's the question this story leaves us with. What truths are you protecting with your silence? What masks are you wearing because you're afraid of what might happen if you took them off? If Jasmine Crockett could confront power on live television and discover compassion for her opponent, what confrontations might you be avoiding? If Ivanka Trump could begin the work of becoming honest after a lifetime of performance, what performances might you be ready to end? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Share in the comments what this story stirred up for you. Which moment hit the hardest? Which character's journey resonated with your own? If this story moved you, do me a favor. Hit that like button, share this with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe if you haven't already. These stories only reach people because of you. Because you watch them, you share them, you talk about them. Until next time, stay honest, stay brave, and remember, the truth isn't something you find, it's something you become.